Welcome back. In section 14, we're going to kick off our analysis of the transload ocean import operating model. Yet another import model that has become very popular in the United States is known as transload. We want to point out right away that transload is substantially different from buyer's consolidation and direct to store for a number of reasons. Third bullet, the most important one on this slide, is that the primary distinction is that under a transload model, the allocation of inventory in ocean containers happens at destination. Under buyer's consol and direct to store, inventory is allocated at origin. Under transload, it's destination. And let us point out that the photos that are shown in these slides are actual transload operations in the United States. Quick trade tip. Transload operations are run by 3PLs that are in close proximity to arrival ports in the United States. When we spoke of CFS operations, we wanted to be in close proximity to ports of loading, ports of export at origin. We want our transload operation in the U.S. or operations, because they can be at multiple ports, to be close by to the port of arrival. As we noted just a second ago, under buyer's consolidation, inventory allocation happens at origin at the CFS. Just to be clear, inventory allocation is the act of the importer instructing the CFS on how to load what quantities of merchandise from different vendors to specific destinations. As we have said from the get-go when we started this module, ocean import operating models are really about inventory allocation. Transload is no different. Second bullet point, with transload, the importer has the advantage of being able to allocate the contents of containers just prior to their arrival in the United States. At its core, transload means that FCL ocean containers, full containers coming from vendors overseas, are stripped at a U.S. facility and items are assigned to truck or rail trailers destined for specific locations. Hence the name transload. Look at the photo on the right. We said this a minute ago. This is an actual transload operation in the United States. It happens to be in Southern California. The gentlemen in this picture are stripping an ocean container that has just come off of one of the terminals at the ports of LA or Long Beach. They are stripping that ocean container, and they're going to transfer the contents of a container out to domestic trailers that will then be transported to a destination in the United States. They are transloading merchandise. Usually, we'll note in our last sub-bullet point on this slide, those outbound domestic trailers from a transload facility are typically going out to a regional DC, but it could also be a store. Most of the time, it's a regional distribution center. The primary advantage of transload is that importers can continue to receive demand signals from stores, web sales, etc. as ships approach the U.S. and then allocate inventory based on actual demand. This is the key attraction to transload. As we see in our sub-bullet, compared to buyer's consol, where allocation decisions are made further upstream at origin and much earlier. Transload, as an importer, we can wait. Containers, full containers, are coming from vendors. They're on the water. They're getting closer and closer to the United States port of arrival. All the while, we as the importer can receive demand signals, point of sale information from our stores, web orders, and based on that actual demand, we can decide on what to do with the contents of these ocean containers. What do we mean by what to do with the contents? What DC are we going to send merchandise to based on actual and very recent demand signals? Trade tip, this type of model is also known as a postponement strategy. It's called a postponement strategy because we essentially, as the importer, are postponing the allocation of inventory until the last possible minute. And as we'll see in just 1 second, that last possible minute is right before a ship arrives, typically a day before a ship arrives at the port of destination. Integral to a transload operation is the supplier's ability to ship on an FCL basis. This is a pretty important point to make because it is fairly unusual to see a buyer's console operation at origin and then have goods be transloaded at destination. There's too much duplication of effort, there's too much additional expense, and although it can happen, buyer's console at origin, transload at destination for the same containers, it somewhat defeats the purpose of the exercise. As such, we want full container loads coming out of factories at origin that will be transported across the ocean, cleared at the first port of arrival in the U.S., and then those containers are drayed from the ocean terminal, taken to a transload facility that is in close proximity to the port of arrival, and they are stripped there. For all of this to work, second bullet point, for these FCL shipments, the designated forwarder must be able to send what's called an advance ship notice. We should recognize this right out of the gate. We've mentioned it a bunch of times. We showed documentation examples of an ASN. The ASN, as we know, is an electronic message that provides details on the contents of containers. In order for the importer to send split instructions, electronic split instructions, to a transload facility in the United States, we as that importer have to know what is coming in the containers. The ASN will tell us that at a purchase order and item level. Last sub-bullet point, ASNs are normally sent by the origin forwarder a day or two after a vessel sails. We can use that ASN as the importer, as we discussed previously, to not only coordinate customs clearance, get our customs clearance file ready before the ship is 5 days out of port, but also use that same ASN to provide split instructions to a transload operator in the U.S. Let's go into this whole idea of split instructions a little bit more deeply. Based on that ASN, the importer will send electronically these split instructions to the transload operator. And a split instruction is simply an electronic message to that operator that provides details on how to allocate items within an ocean container. That is what we see on the right-hand side. These gentlemen, once again, are stripping an ocean container. They will have already received the split instructions, and they're taking the content from this ocean container and putting merchandise into domestic trailers that are assigned to specific destinations around the country. Maybe it's 2 destinations, maybe it's 4. It depends on the importer. But all of these instructions, as we see in our sub-bullet point, in bullet point 2, the instruction is at a PO and item level. As a quick example, we may have an item, 1,000 pieces of a given item in this ocean container that we're looking at on the right. The split instruction will say, take 500 of those items and send them to DC1 in Dallas, Texas. Take 250 of that item and send them to DC2 in Mechanicsburg, PA. That should ring a bell. And take the remaining 250 and send them to a DC up in Seattle. That is precisely what we're talking about here. But it's not just for one item in a container, unless the container only has one item in it, which can happen. But usually vendors are making more than one product for a given importer, and we as the importer have to provide instructions on how to split everything that's in that container. Last bullet, depending on the service level agreement the importer has in place with the transload operator, the importer can wait up until a day before a vessel arrives to provide those container-specific split instructions. That is a big advantage over buyer's console, because again, we're committing our inventory at origin under buyer's console. Under transload, we can postpone the allocation of inventory until a day before the ship arrives at the port of Seattle, at the port of LA Long Beach, the port of Savannah, and all the while gather actual demand signals from our omni-channel operations and base the allocation of inventory on those actual demand signals. We're going to finish this section here, and as we have done consistently throughout this module, we'll come back and look at the visual portrayal this time of transload in a 2-slide format.